Okay, today we're going to cover Chapter 8, which is the special senses. As with the previous chapters, you have a list of objectives that at the end, after listening to this lecture and reading your textbook, you should be able to go back and answer these. Alright, your special senses. They are smell, taste, sight, and hearing. Equilibrium is the fifth special sense. Touch is not a special sense. It's actually a general sense, but a lot of people get that confused. So there's 5 special senses: equilibrium, smell, taste, sight, and hearing. They're essentially part of the nervous system. All are somewhat functional at birth. Alright, we're going to start with the eye. 70% of sensory receptors are found here. The eye is essentially a 1-inch sphere, and it is 1/6 is the portion that you can actually see. Now, the associated structures. You've got eyelids. Those serve to protect. They have eyelashes, which shield stuff from getting in the eye. The tarsal glands are found there, and they secrete a lubricant. The second is the conjunctiva, which gets infected during pink eye, which is called conjunctivitis. Now here, this lines the eyelids and covers the outer surface of the eyeball and also secretes mucus for lubrication. The lacrimal apparatus has the lacrimal glands, which secrete tears. The lacrimal ducts are the ducts that drain the tears into the nasal cavity, and the tears contain lysosomes with antibodies. Now, this is the reason why when you cry, your nose runs, and it's because those tears are draining into the nose cavity. You have 6 extrinsic muscles that are all found externally that produce movement. Now, strabismus is cross-eyed. That's where you have an unequal pulling. Here, we strengthen the eye with exercise or correct with surgery. This is where one of the reasons why you would use a patch on the good eye to strengthen the weak eye or weak muscle. Alright, you have 3 layers or tunics to the eye. The first one is the sclera. When looking at the eye, that makes up the white of the eye. It is the outermost tunic, and it's made of a thick white connective tissue. Now, as that sclera wraps around the front of the eye, it becomes clear, and we call it the cornea. Now, this is where light is going to enter. There's no major blood vessels, so it can be transplanted easily. The second tunic or layer is the middle layer, the choroid coat. This is also called the brown layer because it is rich in blood vessels. This is a pigmented area that prevents light from scattering. And again, as it wraps around front, it's going to form the iris, which is the colored part of your eye. And this controls the amount of light entering the eye. Now, the opening in the middle of the iris is called the pupil, and that dilates to let more light in or constricts to let less light in. The last and the innermost layer is the retina, also called the neural layer, because it contains the neurons, which are your photoreceptors, rods and cones. Here, electrical impulses travel via those neurons to the optic nerve. Now, there is a blind spot where the optic nerve leaves the eyeball. But that's okay. That just means that there's no rods or cones there. But light isn't focused there, so it's okay. Now, rods, again, rods and cones are the neurons. Rods see in gray tones, so they see in dim and peripheral vision, where cones see in color and in bright light. Alright, so if we look at our illustration, you can see that the sclera is this outer white coat, and then as it wraps around front, it becomes clear, and we call it the cornea. The middle or brown coat is the choroid coat, and then as it wraps around front, it becomes the iris, which is the colored part of the eye, and then the hole in the iris is the pupil. Then the yellow layer here is the innermost tunic, which is the retina, and that's the neural layer. And posteriorly, it's going to join and make the optic nerve. Now, the lens focuses light onto the retina. It's biconvex, and it's held in place by ligaments. Humors. A humor is a bodily fluid. So you have two humors in the eye, the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor. All right, the lens serves as the divider. Everything in front of the lens or anterior to the lens is filled with aqueous humor. Everything posterior to the lens is filled with vitreous humor. So A, anterior, aqueous. Now, this is a watery fluid secreted by the choroid. It maintains pressure and gives nutrients for the cornea and lens. Now, the aqueous humor is made and drained daily. The vitreous humor, again, is found in the posterior chamber. It's gel-like. This prevents the eyeball from collapsing. This is made in embryo, and if it is damaged or it drains, you cannot replace it. All right, so looking at the illustration in the top left-hand corner, you can see the lens, and then everything in front of it is filled with aqueous humor, and everything behind it is filled with vitreous humor. Now, an ophthalmoscope is an instrument used to visualize the interior eye. And so the bottom right picture, you can see the retina with all the blood vessels. Your homeostatic imbalance, night blindness. This is typically a vitamin A deficiency, which results in rod damage. Now, you can have other reasons for night blindness, like for example, going to the tanning beds and not wearing the protective eye goggles will damage the retina and the rods. Just like not wearing good sunglasses and being outside all the time, same type of thing. Color blindness is genetic. This is a lack of red and or green cones. Cataracts is where the lens hardens, becomes cloudy and opaque. Now, it's typically due to a protein buildup. Glaucoma is where the aqueous humor doesn't drain properly, and so it puts pressure on the retina and optic nerve. It is asymptomatic until toward the late end stages, and it's a very slow progression. They test your glaucoma at the eye doctor when you get that poof of air. All right, vision. Refraction, that's the bending of the light rays. Bending power of the lens can be changed by changing the shape of the lens. The image formed on the retina is reversed and smaller. Now, axons from the retina carry the impulse to the optic nerve, then to the optic tracts, and finally to the optic radiation, which is in the occipital lobe. And that's where your brain will interpret what you saw. So in this picture, you can see, again, we're looking at an R right side up, but when it actually sees in the back of your brain, it's flipped and upside down and smaller. All right, this is a picture showing you that when you see, not everything exactly goes to the same parts of your brain. Notice there are blue and yellow nerve, fibers coming off the back of the eye. Notice that the medial ones actually cross and go to opposite sides of the brain, where the lateral do not. They stay to the same side, further making it, just amazing that we see the way we do. Eye reflexes. Well, the external muscles are controlled by the somatic nervous system, which remember is your voluntary nervous system. The pupil size is controlled by the autonomic nervous system, which remember is your automatic or involuntary nervous system. You have photopupillary reflex. This is the constriction of the pupils in response to bright light. Again, that's done automatically. Accommodation pupillary reflex is constriction of pupils to view close objects. So like if you're bringing a book closer to your eyes or further from your eyes. Which of the following is an accessory structure to the eye? A, lens, B, choroid, C, external muscles, or D, sclera? The answer would be C, external muscles. Now, the tympanic membrane is part of the A, ear, B, nose, C, tongue, D, eye. That would be A, ear, and that's where we go to next. All right, the ear is divided into three segments, the outer, the middle, and the inner ear. we're going to start with the outer ear. You have the pinna, also called the auricle. That's your outer ear. That helps collect and direct sound. It directs the sound into the external acoustic meatus, which is your ear canal. This is what you clean when you clean your ears. Now, this lies in the temporal bone, and it's lined with skin. It contains ceruminous glands, which secrete earwax, which is cerumen. Then it runs to the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. Again, this is all the outer ear. The middle ear is going to start at that same tympanic membrane. So, the middle ear is a small air-filled cavity. It begins laterally at the eardrum, the tympanic membrane, and ends medially at the bony wall. You have the pharyngotympanic tube, also called the eustachian tube. This opens to the throat to equalize pressure. So it's an area where the middle ear and the back of the throat are connected. Now in children, they have very short eustachian tubes, which is why anytime they get a runny nose or sore throat, it immediately backs up into their ears and they get ear infections. As we age and grow, our eustachian tube gets longer and straightens out. That's why you don't see a lot of adults having ear infections. Now, ossicles. These are your inner ear bones. They're the smallest bones in your body, and they transmit vibrations to the inner ear. You have three. The malleus, which looks like a hammer, the incus, which looks kind of like an anvil, and the stapes, which looks like a stirrup. Alright, in this picture we can see, starting with the outer ear, we have the pinna or the auricle, the outer ear lobe, then the external acoustic meatus, the ear canal, to the tympanum. Then you have the inner ear bones, the ossicles. You have the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And then we're going to join into the inner ear. Now, the inner ear is a bony labyrinth full of chambers. You have the cochlea, which looks like a snail shell. That's going to be used for hearing. So you think you hold a shell to your ear, you can hear the ocean. The second structure is a vestibule, which is kind of like the entrance. And then the semicircular canals, which are all those loopy things you see in the picture. They're filled with perilymph, which is a plasma-like fluid, and a thicker endolymph. Alright, so let's talk about equilibrium. This involves sensory receptors in the vestibule and the semicircular canals. So we're going to start with the first type of equilibrium, which is static equilibrium. This deals with linear movement, so straight line, meaning acceleration, forwards and backwards, or up and down. The structure here is the maculae. These are the receptors found in the vestibule, and they report head position. The maculae are a patch of receptor cells with hairs embedded in the membrane. The head moves, and a gel material moves in response to gravity and then bends the hairs. The hair cells send a signal via the nerve to the cerebellum. Okay, so in this illustration, you can see the hair cells and the little gel, and again, they're going to bend and then send a signal up and into the nerve, to the brain. Dynamic equilibrium deals with angular and rotational movements. Here you have the crista ampullaris, which is the receptor region with the hair cells covered in a gel, which is the cupula. The cupula bends, sends signals to the cerebellum, which you can see in the picture. Hearing. Now we're going to move on and talk about hearing. Here you have the organ of Corti. It's found in the cochlea and contains hearing receptors, or the hair cells. You have the basilar membrane, which you can see in the bottom picture. This is where the hair receptors are found. The tectoral membrane overlies those receptor cells. Now the receptor cells are going to send impulses to the auditory cortex and the temporal lobe, and that's where you will interpret sound. Okay, so what actually happens when you hear something? All right, sound travels through the external acoustic canal. Then that vibrates the tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. That vibrates those inner ear bones, the ossicles, which vibrate the bony wall. And then that sends waves in the endolymph or perilymph, that fluid in the inner ear. That fluid then causes the basilar membrane to come up. The hair cells touch the tectoral membrane, and that kicks off the action potential, which then travels down the nerve to the temporal lobe. your homeostatic imbalances. All right, you have conduction deafness. Here, you have something that's causing a problem getting the sound to the actual nerve. So it could be mechanical, something interfering with sound vibrations. Maybe it's too much earwax, ruptured eardrum, otosclerosis, which is where the eardrum becomes sclerotic or hardens. Sensorineural deafness is where you actually have nerve damage or maybe degeneration of the receptors, nerves, or a problem with the auditory cortex in the brain. So this is a result typically of loud sounds. Otis media is where the eardrum is inflamed. If fluid accumulates, you can lance the eardrum, which means cut it, and then implant the tube to help relieve pressure. This is done in children frequently until they grow and that eustachian tube elongates. Okay, now we're going to move on to chemical senses. You have two chemical senses in your body, taste and smell. Chemoreceptors will respond to chemicals in solution. So you have olfactory receptors. These deal with smell. They're located in a patch of each upper nasal cavity. So they're found in the roof of your nose. Now remember, they have to respond to a chemical in solution. So the solution here would be mucus. Taste buds deal with taste. They're mostly on the tongue and some on the soft palate and inner cheeks. Again, the fluid here would be saliva. So we'll start with olfaction. Again, the olfactory receptors are actual neurons, free nerve endings with hairs. They're bathed in mucus and they transmit via the olfactory nerve to the olfactory cortex, and you smell. Now, those free nerve endings is why you smell instantaneously. Now, it's also tied to the limbic system of the brain, which is your emotional system, making it part of your long-term memory, which is also why you think you smell your ex-boyfriend's cologne and you think of him, or your ex-girlfriend's perfume and you think of her. All right, in this picture you can see the roof of the nose, so you actually have the free nerve endings that are covered with mucus, and it directly goes to the brain. So this is again why you smell instantly. Taste. Here you have the papillae, which are the dorsal part of the tongue. The taste buds are found on side. Now, the gustatory cells are the receptors. You have the epithelial microvilli protrude through the taste pore. Again, they'll send the impulse to the gustatory cortex in the brain. Now, this again is very quick. Chemical dissolving a solution happens almost instantly, so you can taste fairly easily. Now, cravings can supply the body with needed nutrients. Sugar and salt cravings happen if your body needs carbs. Pica is the craving of non-food substances like clay. Excuse me. That's typically indicative of an ion or nutrient imbalance, like you'll hear about pregnant women eating clay, and that's typically because it's an iron deficiency, so they're looking for iron in the clay. Now, dislike bitterness. Well, that's protective since poisons and spoiled foods typically taste bitter. Olfaction is 80% of taste. And think about that. If something smells bad, you typically don't even want to taste it. Or if you smell pizza, oh, you can almost taste it. Now, texture and temperature can also affect taste. All right, developmentally, vision. Newborns see gray tones. They don't see in color. That's why most of your newborn toys are in black and white. Now, they typically don't start to see color until 6 to 8 months, and pretty on into it. Now, lacrimal glands, your tears, are not active until after the first 2 weeks, which is why when newborns cry, there actually aren't any tears till about 2 weeks. Now, by 5 years old, your color is well developed and you have great depth perception. But from that point on, you start to lose your vision. So you see the best in your life at 5 years old. And then it just kind of goes to crap. Now, elderly, presbyopia. That's where the lens is less elastic, making it harder to see close items. The lacrimal glands also become less active, so the eyes dry out. The lenses are less clear due to cataracts and protein buildup. And the iris is less efficient, and pupils become constricted. Now, as far as taste, it's sharpest when you're young, which is why we feed infants bland food, because they can taste everything. It's also why children typically don't like vegetables, because they can actually taste them, but then as adults, they don't taste so bad, because as you age, it declines. So by the time you're in your 70s or 80s, you can hardly taste anything anymore, which is why old or elderly people don't like to eat, and they end up malnutrition because they can't taste it anymore. And let's be real, we eat because it tastes good. If you couldn't taste it, you might not want to eat as much. Okay, when your pupil gets smaller, this structure is changing shape. Is it A, lens, B, cornea, C, iris, or D, retina? The answer is C, iris. The special sense that involves the maculae and reporting the head position is A, hearing, B, static equilibrium, C, dynamic equilibrium, or D, olfaction. And the answer is B, static equilibrium.